We begin tonight with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's official trip to China. This is Trudeau's second visit since taking office in the year 2015. The Canadian leader has met with his Chinese counterpart Li Keqiang this afternoon.
China's Li Keqiang and Canada's Justin Trudeau share more than just their titles. They also have salesmanship. The two leaders have pushed hard to promote trade and cooperation between their two countries. This meeting marks another historical moment where the Chinese super salesman meets his Canadian counterpart. During the meeting, Li said China will continue opening up to overseas investment and further promote a better business environment. Trudeau said Canada will push for globalization and free trade with China. The two agreed to further promote bilateral trade and investment and enhance communications in international and regional affairs. Li and Trudeau also signed deals in the education, food safety and energy sectors.
I think there's no question that both sides are interested in engaging in free trade talks or talks on a comprehensive economic agreement of some sort. I think this visit will kick it off, and I hope it does. I think this will be welcomed by businesses on both sides.
In the first half of this year, merchandise trade reached 45 billion Canadian dollars or 35 billion US dollars. Canada's exports to China have surged 20% in the first 6 months of 2017, reaching 9.5 billion US dollars. Wood, agriculture products, and motor vehicles are among the top shipments. Imports from China have also grown 11% to hit 26 billion US dollars. Experts say both sides stand to benefit from a free trade deal, and for China this would open new gateways to the North American market and pave the way for more trade pacts in the future. Later this week, Trudeau will travel to Guangzhou in South China to attend the Fortune Global Forum.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau belongs to the young generation of Canadian politicians. He has been thriving in the Liberal Party, the political party of his father, Pierre Trudeau, and also of Jean Chretien, the former Canadian Prime Minister from the 1990s to the early 21st century. I recently sat down with the former Prime Minister Jean Chretien, a straight shooter who has not been afraid of any controversy throughout his political life. He seems to be, though, very happy with what Prime Minister Trudeau and his administration, young administration, has been doing so far.
We have a young Prime Minister, as you know. He's very well known across the world because he has a very interesting personality. And he has a young team with him. It's a new generation. Of course, our political party exists since 150 years. And his father was my predecessor, and he is my successor. So it's...
and you even served in his father's administration.
Oh, for 15 years. I became a cabinet minister the same day than his father, in 1968. So I know him well, and I think he's doing very well. You know, Father Trudeau was the one to recognize China before the Americans did it and many others.
Mr. Prime Minister, what do you consider as the most important qualities of leadership today?
You know, it's a very complicated world today. And
more complicated than when you were the Prime Minister?
In a way, because communications are not the same anymore. Communications are less reliable. The people have all these little machines, and we don't know what is true and what is not true.
Right.
Sometimes we're complaining, but the news were more serious than the news we have today. There was no tweeting in my time, you know, and everything was more serious, let me put it this way. So it's complicated.
So you believe it is a communication skill that is the most important these days? It sounds like.
You have to... No, you have to be competent. You have to know what you're talking about. You know, competence is at the base of everything. Intelligence and knowledge. And we have to be open to the world. You know, I was very open to the world. I was always a free trader. I came with big Canadian delegation to China in 1994 and to open up trade with China. In fact, the first investment that the Chinese made abroad was in a pulp mill in Canada. The partner was my family. So, and it was profitable for both. And so trade is a key.
Talking about trade, your country, Canada, is facing quite a dilemma right now. Canada is an active partner of the NAFTA. However, the United States now have more preconditions for the continuation of that mechanism.
You know, the negotiations are going on at this time. Of course, we signed that. The NAFTA was signed when I was Prime Minister. Became the Prime Minister in November 93. And, you know, the law were passed in the United States and in Canada in the fall of 94 when I was Prime Minister. So it is normal after 23 years that of activities that adjustment be made to any trade system. My view is that, of course, there will be a lot of banging the door, but at the end of the day, they will have to be reasonable. And the integration of our economy with the United States is there since a long time. The automobile industry were integrated before NAFTA. The integration, we call it the Auto Pact, and the Auto Pact was signed in 1965. So to undo an omelette, madame, is very, very difficult. And the eggs have been broken, and it's very difficult to go back to the status quo of ante. You know, it is not possible. But so that we will find a deal, one way or the other.
Well, Mr. Prime Minister, you know, banning the door process is already very frustrating, I guess, for all parties, because I understand the latest rounds of discussions involving the three parties actually did not score much, to say the least.
You know,
it is said that the team from the United States is eager to score for the administration, which is facing quite a different number of challenges. So Canada is put on spot.
We are put on spot, but they are on spot too. Because you have to realize that when I signed NAFTA with Bill Clinton, when in the United States they passed the bill, Bill Clinton was a Democrat. He had all the votes of the Republican and only half of the Democrat. So the free trading part of the political spectrum in the United States are the Republican. And today, I know that a lot of states that voted for Trump are very much free traders. Take Iowa, for example. They need the market of Mexico. A big part of the agricultural production is going to Mexico. So even if they voted for Trump, they want to keep free trade. And all negotiations like that, you know, I've been in public life quite a long time. The game is not over until the game is over.
That's right.
So and very often there is always a build-up of tension until you have to sign. And you, the press, you want to have a problem.
We jump on it.
Because when you don't have a problem, you have no job to do. So, you know, so they write about problems. Of course, there is problem. There are always problems.
But, you know, this time, it's not easy to brush it off because there is some ideological divide that we are talking about. It's not just these negotiations, not just the skills of negotiations. You have some countries talking about bilateral only, not necessarily looking at the regional and international in a very favorite light. You could argue in the fabric of the society there's still very strong support.
Yeah, but you just mentioned all the ideology. I just told you that the Republican Party is the one for generation who were the free traders, and it was the Democrats who were against free trade. It was like that when I was Prime Minister of Canada. So I think that the party of Mr. Trump is having a lot of problem with some of his tweeting because it is not what is the view of its political party.
Then what is the best way for Canada now to survive?
To stay cool, madame.
Oh, is it easy to stay cool?
I
what
know,
are the tricks
and
to
we
stay
have
cool?
good, very competent negotiators who are well briefed. They know what they're talking about. But I dealt. I was Minister of Commerce myself for Canada. I was Minister of Finance, and dealt with the Americans as a cabinet minister for more than almost 30 years. So, of course they can walk away. It's always a possibility. But I would be very surprised. They will come to some resolution with Canada.
Canada is working on many different platforms, including G20, for example, as well as joining the AIIB, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Even though Canada is still thinking about whether to join the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI.
Yeah, I don't know why this road is stopping at Europe. You have to keep going, and if you keep going, you arrive in Canada. You know, from Gibraltar to Nova Scotia, the eastern part of Canada, you know, it is not very far. The Atlantic is narrow there, relatively speaking.
So Canada is embracing the idea? You think it should?
You know, we do a lot of business. You know, Canada is both on the Pacific and the Atlantic. So you're going to the West Coast, and we want you to come more on the East Coast. And so if you keep your road past Gibraltar, next stop is Sydney, Nova Scotia.
There are some people talking about bilateral free trade agreement between China and Canada. Some suggest it is not yet the time. Others say, well, why don't we think about that? What is your view, Mr. Prime Minister?
But we're talking about it at this time. So I hope, personally, I hope that it will have a deal. But I don't know. I'm not a negotiator. I don't speak for the government.
What do you consider as the biggest challenges in terms of trade and economic ties, which you are very passionate about, Mr. Prime Minister, between China and Canada today?
I really don't know the precise problem. I have a kind of a notion that if you could make a deal with Australia, why you cannot make a deal with Canada? The problems must be very similar from one to the other. We're exporting agricultural products, we're exporting minerals of all sorts. Canada export oil and gas, and you know, so my view is if it was possible with Australia, it should be possible with Canada, but I'm not privy to the negotiation.
China and Canada, with some very significant figures trying to build the bridges, have been improving ties over the decades, including you yourself, Mr. Prime Minister.
I kept going here, even if it was not my party in government, and because I felt it was needed. We had a period when the Conservatives were in government where the relations were not as good, and I was very critical of their policy vis-à-vis China. And I would come to China in those days telling everybody, relax. Good government would come back to Canada. It's what we have today.
Mr. Prime Minister, though, over the years, you see perceptions in Canada about China have been evolving. However, some suggest it is still far away, the perceptions about China, from the realities of China.
But you remember when I was Prime Minister in '94, I came with 500 business people, all the premiers and delegation from universities. I've done it twice in my 10 years. You know that Mandarin is the third most spoken language in Canada now. So we have a lot of Chinese people who are in the land and being very good citizens and doing very well. So I think that, you know, it's improving, but we should not neglect.
But China is also changing. China, from the time when you were the Prime Minister, was still a rising economy. Now it has become the second largest. And China has been talking about its own goals by the year 2050, which the President said in the 19th Party Congress.
Yeah, but
and many
you know,
say China has becoming assertive over the years.
Yeah, but what's wrong with that? As I claim all the time, you know, the emergence of China in the last 30 years have created a lot of wealth around the globe. When I came in '94, the ladies were not dressed like you are. And, you know, and there was not the stores that we see on the street today. So that's a sign that there's a lot more wealth in the land. And that creates more wealth for the globe. And, you know, it's why all the countries benefit from the success of China. How to manage it, it's always complicated. But nothing is easy in life.
Very charismatic, Jean Chretien served as the Canadian Prime Minister from the year 1993 to 2003. He nailed down, as we mentioned earlier, NAFTA with the former U.S. President Bill Clinton back in the year 1993. It is certainly a significant deal even today. He also introduced the Clarity Act to establish the conditions which would apply to a referendum regarding the separation of Quebec from Canada in the year 1995. Despite all the controversy, he has been regarded favorably by many Canadians even today. Prime Minister Chretien has also been very instrumental throughout the decades for building bridges of trade, economic cooperation between China and Canada. You have been remembered as one of the very outstanding Prime Minister of Canada, even though you resigned after serving your country for 10 years. How would you reflect back upon those years in which you were very charismatic in pushing forward some of the agendas? For example, Mr. Prime Minister, you were very determined and strong when Quebec was trying to seek independence from Canada, even though you yourself is originally coming from Quebec, and eventually come to something called Clarity Law.
But it is always very difficult when you have these issues because it's often a debate between emotion and reason. And it's more exciting to be on the side of emotion than on the side of reason. And I was on the side of reason. And they were asking crooked questions, so I passed a law, said, if you want, we permit the right of people, to express desire to separate. And today I can report to you that the problem has not completely disappeared, but it's not an issue anymore. The separatist party in Quebec has dropped in third position and dropping every week. So the people of Canada and the Quebecers, we have become more internationalist. When I meet some of the people of younger generation, they always want to talk to me about the role of Canada internationally. And it's very encouraging. So I'm very optimistic that we have a very stable situation now on that problem. And my success, the Liberal Prime Minister, Mr. Trudeau, is personally very popular these days in Quebec.
Yes, indeed.
So everything is not too bad. Pretty good.
Pretty good. The other thing you just said, you're on the side of reasoning. You're not on the side of emotion. But that is a dilemma many politicians these days face, and some of them chose the side of emotion rather than the side of reason. So is there something that you can share with them that would help them in the future?
When you talk reason, you have to trust the judgment of the people. The people understand what is reasonable. They might get excited through emotion, but when they sit down, they have to face the reality of life. And the reality of life gave you the notion that reason has to prevail. So when, after the emotion of the meeting, you go back home, reason come back. And you have to have confidence that reason will prevail, and it's exactly what happened to Canada.
I would love to learn from what you have just said. I remember very dearly, Mr. Prime Minister, your last day serving your post as the Prime Minister of Canada. You were very passionate and compassionate at your last press conference. I was there as a very young reporter. I think you won the hearts of friend and foe of that moment. But at the end of the day, politics is not fair to the well-intentioned.
Politics is a competitive business. In a democracy like ours, we win and lose election. It's not pleasant to lose election, but it might happen. I was one of a rare one who has been elected 12 times as a member of Parliament and won 3 majority governments as a Prime Minister. Never lost an election. But I don't know many people who have had the life in politics who never had lost any election. And you live with that. And you know that someday it might be over. I used to say politics is the art of skating on thin ice. And you never know when there will be a hole that will gobble you up and it will disappear forever. So for me, I managed to survive more than, at the end of the day, you say to yourself, I survived one more day. For me, I managed to survive more than 13,333 days. And I enjoyed them.
You are an optimist as a result of that. How do you see, whether in politics or out of it now, controversies people created about you?
You know, if they say something and they are right, you correct the situation. If they say something that they are wrong, you speak up your mind and trust the judgment of the people.
Once again.
And yeah, and the people of Canada knew me. I've been on the TV for 40 years. So, you know, they knew who I was. And they knew exactly the personage they were appearing on their TV. It was me. I was around for a long time, and I'm very happy in retirement and was happy to give you an interview this morning.